Hi, I'm Jim Knotts, President and CEO of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. Welcome to today's virtual reading of the names. 2022 marks the 40th anniversary of the dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. As part of our commemoration, we'll host an in-person reading of the names at the wall from November 7th through 10th, 2022, when all 58,281 names on the wall will be read aloud. In the lead up to that event, we'll be reading names each day online while sharing the photos of these heroes. For our daily virtual reading, the names of the service members will be read by month and day of death between the years 1956 and 1975 in alphabetical order for the given day. We apologize in advance for any mispronunciations. Know that our readers are doing their best to honor these service members. We hope you'll listen and watch each day and share with others as we remember and honor those who gave their lives during the Vietnam War.
Roland Joseph Adomely, Richard Edward Addison, Jr., Catalino B. Antonio, Jr., Howard Carlton Ard, Robert Arnold, Norman Dwayne Oughton, John Wayne Baden, Jesse Rutledge Baker, Ruston Lee Baker, Kenneth Maynard Baldwin, Gerald Roy Ballard, Donald Richard Barrett, Harold Bruce Barton, William John Bassignani, Robert Fillmore Batson, Stephen Eugene Bebout, Martin John Bagosh, Charles Theodore Belasco, Newton Thomas Bell, Jr., John Bell, Jr., Willard Gordon Bellamy, John Charles Bieneman, Frank Hufford Blank, Robert Norman Bowman, Robert George Bousquet, James E. Bowers, George Allen Branch, Thomas Richard Brand, James Roy Brooks, Jr., Howard Russell Bruckner, Stephen Cornell Brunton, William John Bryant, Marvin Douglas Buckridge, Daniel Cardenas, Jr., Joe David Carroll, James Caudill, Joseph Carmen Sharone, Jr., Roger Dale Cheek, Carrie Edward Clark, Robert Fishel Cochran, Jr., Ollie Ray Cotton, Gary Robert Cruz, Billy Cunningham, Philip Anthony D'Amico, Jr., Edward Robinson Darville III, Stephen Winfield Davis, Daniel Richard Davis, Mario P. De Leon, Gilbert Trevino Delgado, Francis John Duncan Delmark, Arthur Gerald Denton, James Philip DeWitt, Stanley Heman Dickerson, Floyd Eugene Dodds, Arthur Leroy Doyley, Jr., Robert Hughes Donaway, Ryland Whitney Drawdy, Ralph Nelson Demling, Steve Gonzalez Duran, James Doyle Eisenhower, Don Thomas Elledge, Rodney Louis Engel, Norman Lee Eversgerd, Alvis Ray Faverty, Jr.,
Aiden Figueroa, Thomas Elwood Firth, Victor Flores Jr., Robert Allen Fox, Baron Allen Frazier, Ronald Eugene Gerwig, Gerald Marion Gishier, Rigberto Gomez Diaz, Patrick Joseph Griffin, Mark Weldon Grigsby, Thomas LaVon Gunderson, George Allen Guy, Verlin Hadley, William Alfred Hadstock, Michael Dwayne Hahn, Michael David Hale, Harry David Ham, Lloyd Harms, Gary Wayne Harvey, James Ralph Heater, Ronald Matthias Heinecke, Bruce James Hendrick, Gerald Albert Henry, Willie Lee Henry, Edwin Cloyd Hockenberry, James G. Hodgkin Jr., Charles James Holland, Charles Ernest Inuzzi, John Charles Emiri, Richard Mark Jarvis, John J. Jemison, Henry Crawley Jordan. James Noble Khalil, Harry Leonard Koss Jr., Robert Anthony Keogh, Thomas R. Kelly, Robert Francis Kelly, Randolph Charles Kett, James Walter Kursky, Edward Kopic, James Clyde Cranach, Kenneth Lionel Crom, Willie Clyde Cook-Kendall, Larry John LaPointe, William Clive Laidlaw, Fred Emery Land, Eddie Lee Landry, Andre Roland Latessa, Thomas Anthony Lee Jr., David Lewis, Robert Ory Long, Don Wayne Love, Roy Dallas Lowe Jr., Hector Lugo Maheca, Eugene Helen Major, Daniel Makowetz, Kenneth J. Manderfeld, Merlin Eugene Marquette, Vincent Tommy Muskelly, Jurgen August Mayer, Robert Allen McAllister, Kevin Joseph McCardle, Francis McLaughlin, Lyman Alistair McMullen,
Douglas Carroll Merle, George Henry Myers, John Russell Milliken, Fred W. Mitchell, Jr., James Ray Moncrief, Vincent James Musco, Larry Douglas Nelson, Richard William Nelson, Gilbert Ronald Nickerson, William Walter Nickerson, Michael James O'Neill, Larry J. Orozco, Louis Wayne Page, Thomas Henry Pappenheim, Benny Bruce Parker, Charles Edward Patterson, Michael Charles Poliski, Leo Porter, Bruce William Poulson, Donald Gordon Radcliffe, Albert Harold Raitt, Charles Richard Reff, Bobby Riddle, John Carl Rogers, Billy Dwayne Roy, Edward J. Rakowski, John Seneda, James Howard Sawyer, Kenneth Francis Schwegel, Robert Lee Schofield, Douglas Sidney Scroggins, Arthur Seabrooks, Lorenzo Sewell, Dale K. Shambaugh, Joseph Henry Shelton III, Curly Shirelles Jr., Mitchell Conrad Short, Donald Francis Slack Jr., David Leland Smith, James Albert Smith, Edwin Joseph Smolarek Jr., Robert Amon Snavely, James Otis Spa, Robert K. Spilner, David Michael St. John, Kenneth David Stankovich, Thomas Lee Stradman, Leslie Keith Strickland, John Francis Sullivan, Lee Wesley Swain Jr., Robert Taglione, John Bernard Tett, Jerry Donald Tharp, Kenneth Leon Thomas, David John Thomas, David Ramsey Tibbetts, Peter Clark Town, Wallace Oldham Travers Jr., Herman Lee Troop, Martiniano Valentin Jr., Paul Ward Vanderboom Jr., John David Vaneda, Paul Velez, Frederick M. Vickery III, Gary Wayne Walker, Larry Wayne Walker, Sherman Lee Walters, Jimmy Ronald Walton, Melvin Lee Weeks, Bruce Douglas Webb, David Paul Wernette, Freddie Roosevelt Williams, Danny Joe Wilson, William Neal Wilson, Michael Robert Witt, Gary Eugene Young, Arturo S. Zamora,